Secretary Rosenberg, I've noted with some interest the executive branch has surged its economic statecraft tools to hold Russia accountable for its unjust war in Ukraine. The last few months, we've sanctioned hundreds, if not thousands, of Russian entities responsible for perpetuating the war in Ukraine. Not only were we able to identify these obscure targets, but we were also able to coordinate these actions, as you just talked about, a multilateral approach with our international partners in Europe. This, to me, seems like a testament to U.S. government and the dominance that we can provide to the marketplace when we focus our attention on said target. The NIH reported that in 2021, we saw more than 70,000 Americans lose their lives to fentanyl. So my question is, as we think about the weight, I did an interview this morning and talked about the individual loss of life. But we think so often about the 70,000 people who've lost their lives to fentanyl, and sometimes the number itself is so overwhelming that we forget to personalize it. And I think about my friend in Charleston, South Carolina, Dr. Alan Shaw, whose son, Alan Shaw II, 27 years old, lost his life to fentanyl just 2 months ago. And I think about the tools that we may have at our disposal that could disrupt some of the cartels, and to think about, and perhaps it's easier to go to the front line, the top of the food chain, but the middle level folks seem to need to be targeted as well. What, from your vantage point, overseeing TFFC, what is possible for us to do and to use more of the tools to disrupt the financials of not only the top of these cartels, but the mid-level as well? Is there more that we can do in that area? And if so, how do we get there?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. I very much appreciate the approach that you've just noted, not just of identifying the individuals who are the leaders of particular cartels or networks to move drugs and to move money, but also all of the individuals who work as the front line, if you will, for bundling money, for packaging materials and equipment, and of course the illicit drugs themselves. We've found that it's essential to be able to identify and expose and, of course, designate with sanctions the front companies, the exchange houses or money services businesses, the other kinds of businesses that function as fronts in order to launder this money and move the goods and services. Furthermore, being able to explain through the use of typologies or those red flag indicators to other financial institutions or businesses that might come in contact with them, the challenges and the risks involved so that they can avoid them is essential to this work of exposing and disrupting.
So just to put a fine point on it, I heard what you said. I didn't fully hear an answer to my question, however. What else can we do from your perspective to use the tools that we have at our disposal to disrupt the flow of cash to these cartels? Is there more that we can do from your perspective? Certainly, I think we have started targeting some of the heads, and certainly think about the fact that we have 45 co-sponsors to my legislation on fentanyl. To get Democrats and Republicans, 22 on each side, to do something together is like Peter walking on the water these days, right? It's almost a miracle. So the question is more legislation like that helpful, harmful? Do you need more tools? What say you?
I appreciate the question. In addition to what I noted, there's something else I want to mention here as far as what we can do additionally.
Yes.
And that is two things. One is to expand our relationships with foreign partners, specifically Mexico, which is something that was featured in the sanctions designation yesterday. It called out our partnership with Mexican law enforcement officials, which is a way that we can do an even better and more thorough job of getting at money movements and drug movements that traverse several different countries, which is so often the case when we have Chinese precursor chemicals moving through Mexico into the United States. One thing that's very significant and that I warmly welcome from the legislation for which you are a co-sponsor is the expansion of the statute of limitations on enforcement against IEPA crimes to 8 years from 5. Respectfully, I would request that this be expanded even further to 10 years, which would allow us additional significant benefit in compliance and deterrence.
Great. Legislation that I'm sponsoring. That's good to hear. And if I get another round, I know I'm out of time. Yeah, if I can get to a quick question for you, Secretary Rosen. One of the things I've spent some time on is trying to figure out how to disconnect TikTok from having surveillance opportunities of our kids. And one of the ways that we try to do that is in legislation that we've worked on called Know Your App Act, which is a forward-looking solution to ensure Americans are empowered to decide for themselves how to best protect their data and their security. From your viewpoint as Assistant Secretary for Investment Security, do you think providing users with the country of origin on their application is a useful consumer protection measure?
Thank you for that question, Senator, and I certainly share the concern emanating in the legislation. More information on these topics for parents and also just general transparency is very important, particularly when you're talking about countries of concern, and particularly when you're talking about countries of concern with laws on the books that see no line between being able to access and manipulate that data. So I'm certainly willing to work with you on that and understand those issues.
And my last point, not a question, but I'll have a question for the record on CFIUS and how we can look back and track the progress that's been made over the last couple of years and or the impediments to progress from your perspective as it relates to using that very important tool to perhaps put a target on the backs of folks that we think we need to. Thank you.
Senator Reed of Rhode Island.